Thank you very much. One of the purported goals of C-2 is to support the tourism hospitality industry. And if you just take independent travel agents as a case study, about half of the folks that are represented by the Independent Travel Advisors Agency have been very clear that they were being paid under the Canada Recovery Benefit Program, as opposed to any of the wage subsidy program. There's a reason for that. It's because they work for themselves. It's an industry that's about 85% women. A lot of them work out of their basement. Many of them continued to work in the early days of the pandemic, helping their clients secure their rebates or travel vouchers. Many of them are working now to help as folks start to contemplate vacations in the medium term, create bookings, and of course they won't be paid until people actually take the trip. And so this bill really doesn't provide any ongoing support for them. We know that they're getting close to a time when they can support themselves financially, but this bill is an admission that that's a sector that has not yet recovered, and yet there's no help for those folks. So I'm wondering what was the decision, what was the discussion around choosing to proceed in a fashion that would exclude such a high percentage of people in the industry that the government itself has said that they want to continue to support?
Thank you for the question. I can provide some information on the general policy background and how the rules in Part 1 of the bill relating to the COVID subsidies work. And then if my colleague Max would like to jump in on more of the policy analysis side, he could do so. I think that there are really 2 points to be kept in mind in respect to that answer or to the question of independent tour operators. The first, of course, is that the wage and rent subsidies provided under these COVID rules in 125.7 of the Act do not specifically exclude independent contractors. And in fact, if you have a sole proprietor that themselves has employees or pays rent, they could avail themselves of the various subsidies in Part 1 of the bill. However, of course, that's not a complete answer. Because as was noted, a lot of independent tour agents themselves operate as independent contractors, and the wage subsidy in Part 1 of the bill subsidizes wages. Those are wages paid from an employer to employee, and so if no wages are paid or there are no employees, then there would be no qualifying expenses for the wage subsidy. Similar considerations hold true for the rent subsidy. So if you had an agent who was paying rent, perhaps because they were renting out a commercial space, then they could avail themselves of the rent subsidy. But we do understand that that won't always be the case.
In fact, I think it's not the case for about 50% of people in the industry, which to me is a pretty sizable chunk of the industry. We're not talking about some outliers. We're actually talking about a pretty core part of the industry. So I am curious to know what the discussion around excluding those folks from ongoing financial support looked like, and where and when the decision was taken to cut them out.
I can say that from the beginning, the wage subsidy was designed to subsidize wages and help retain the connection between an employer and an employee. And it has not applied to payments to independent contractors or, as been mentioned earlier, dividends from business owners. It was focused on subsidizing wages. As was also noted, other programs forward by the government, like the CERB.
I think what we're trying to understand here is, like, a policy decision was taken to uniquely deploy the wage subsidy policy tool as a way to provide ongoing support to the industry, but it leaves about half the industry behind. So at one time, until very recently, the government had another policy tool that captured those folks. That was the Canada Recovery Benefit. And the Canada Worker Lockdown Benefit was foreseen as the way to try and replace that. I think it does a shoddy job. That's a debate I'm looking forward to having, but not right now. The question is, why, if it was a principal policy objective of the government to continue to support people in the tourism and hospitality industry, was there not a stream in the Canada Worker Lockdown benefit, for instance, that would provide the very people that I'm talking about right now, people who work independently, work for themselves, who comprise a large percentage of the industry? Why was the decision made not to create a stream under the Canada Worker Lockdown benefit that would continue to provide ongoing financial support to them, regardless of whether there was a public health lockdown in effect in their jurisdiction, as described in the Act?
I think I would need to turn to some of my colleagues who have been working on the CRB and Canada Worker Lockdown Benefit in Part 2 of the bill. I can really only speak to Part 1.
Sure.
Very
Thank you
short,
for the
please.
question, Mr. Blaikie. The lockdown benefit, as you mentioned, is really uniquely designed to address situations where workers, including self-employed workers and including could be travel agents, independent travel agents who are affected by the lockdown, could benefit from income support for the duration of the lockdown in their region. And so that's really in the context of addressing restrictions and impact this is having on workers due to public health
Thank you, Mr.
issues.
Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Blaikie.